Hi, I'm Blaze, and I play Marvel Future Fight. Think that's pretty obvious, but just wanted to point that out. I also stream it on Twitch, so definitely check me out on Twitch sometime, and remember to thumb up, like, and subscribe. So one of the things that I wanted to tackle in today's video is something that comes up in conversation quite often, especially with new players to Marvel Future Fight, and that is, what is a debuff and why should I care? So let's talk about first what debuff does, why you want to use it and need to know about it, and then I'll tell you about all the characters that are debuff leads as well as characters who are not debuff leads. And there is one actual exception to debuff leadership that gives debuff to your team. So what is debuff? So to begin with, certain characters have status effects that can lock down your characters. For example, Doctor Strange has the ability to time freeze your characters, locking them in place. Spider-Man has the ability to web them up, locking them in place. And then Scarlet Witch has the ability to mind control them, locking them in place. Now, these, of course, are not the only characters that have, like, webbing and mind control. There are other examples. Some of the other Spider characters, such as Spider-Man 2099, also has the ability to web up, as an example. And, of course, there are other ones that have the mind control as well, or a charm effect, such as Sue Storm. So, why are we talking about this? Because, obviously, if you're in a PvP scenario, you don't want to have your character locked down and dead. Back before debuff was introduced to the game, you had characters like Spider-Man who were just dominating. When the Spider-Man movie came out, and they sometimes jokingly refer to it as the Hobo Spider-Man outfit, this outfit was locking folks down, webbing them up, and just obliterating folks in PvP timeline. Now, some of the exceptions, the characters that could kind of survive it and still kill Spider-Man, you're talking Deadpool and Wolverine because of their regeneration. So you could have some matches that just lasted the entire time until the time ran down. It was very frustrating. So they introduced debuff. What debuff does is it essentially removes those status effects. It takes off the debuff effects that would affect the characters, such as time freeze or webbing or mind control. So you want to use debuff if you're playing in timeline. You want to use debuff if you're playing in Alliance Conquest. You want to use debuff actually if you're playing in GBR. Now, specifically Giant Boss Raid when you're doing Master Mold, because Galactus doesn't actually do the mind control like Master Mold does. But there will be a certain time while you're fighting against Master Mold that you see above your character's head or one of your allies' heads. I dedicate my power to you, and it's like red text. They didn't used to have that text. The screen would slightly turn purplish, and you had to look out for it. What happens when you're mind controlled, specifically in GBR, is you will actually, all damage you do while your allies are around it will hit them as well, and you can actually kill your allies. So the only way to get rid of that is A, stand off to the side until the mind control disappears, B, bring a debuff lead so it doesn't happen or doesn't last, or C, you switch characters. You can actually switch characters. You don't have to have a debuff if you're doing GBR. A lot of folks like to see it, though, and you have to be careful. Mainly, I consider debuff to be a PvP element or player versus player element. Specifically, like I said, timeline and Alliance Conquest. Now, if you take a look, you'll actually see inside of the timeline and the Alliance Conquest, you'll see teams built where the leader slot, and what I mean by that is you'll have a team of 3. So let me show you my timeline team really quick. I'm actually using a debuff leader, which will be one of the first ones that we talk about. So let me go ahead and find timeline really quick. Already completed it for the day. So here's my timeline team right here. So we have a debuff lead, and then I have 2 support characters that buffer up. And if you look at other timeline folks, a lot of them are using debuff leads. In this case, it looks like they're not. This case, they are, because, again, we're talking Jean Grey as one of the debuff leaderships. So a lot of folks will use that because, again, the status effect can really be a nightmare to deal with. You can see the same thing if you go into your timeline, and I believe that's in the arena. Alliance Conquest. I'm sorry, I just said timeline. I just showed you that. Alliance Conquest. So we're in the battle phase right now. So if you come over here to 4, defensive info, you won't always see it, but you'll see, like, there's a debuff leadership here in my squad. Over here we have a debuff leadership. debuff leadership. So let's talk about what debuff leadership looks like and how you identify those characters. And I'm going to give you the full list of debuff characters. So to begin with, this is the exact text that you need to find. So as I'd mentioned, Jean Grey is a debuff leader. So if you go to the skills section, you go down to leadership, and you hold down the button, like if you're using Nox or something, or if you're using your phone, you just hold your finger over it, and it'll show you here what their leadership does. You'll see this says removes all debuffs. If it does not say that, they are not a debuff lead, period. There is a lot of folks that we'll talk about in just a second here, but the removes debuff is what you want to look for. Sometimes it'll say 12 seconds, sometimes it'll say 20. There's actually one person who has a 5-second. The 12-second ones are actually your better debuff leadership because it cools down quicker. But essentially, if you were to get time frozen or webbed or mind controlled, every 12 seconds is essentially just taking it away and releasing your character. Really important. Again, specifically in Timeline and Alliance Conquest. GBR, just make sure you're switching. Don't kill your allies. That makes people angry. Let me show you really quick before we go over the full list of characters, the characters that are not debuff leaders. So Thanos is an example of a character who is not a debuff leader, but the text is very similar. So if we go down the leadership here, you'll see decreases debuff duration by. Now that percentage will vary by character, but that is not a debuff lead. It will decrease how long you're debuffed for, but it will not remove it. And what we want is the removal when we talk about debuff leadership. So really quick, the characters that have decreased debuff duration: Thanos, Minerva, Emma Frost, Negasonic Teenage Warhead, Weapon Hex, X-23, Moon Knight, Venom, Mantis, Maximus, Arachnite, Spider-Man Miles Morales, White Fox, and Morgan Le Fay. They are not debuff leaders. Now let's talk about the actual debuff characters. So to begin with, obviously I'm going to show you all the characters at one time. The top row are the ones that are remove all debuffs by 12 seconds, and in my opinion, better debuff leaders. Jean Grey, Silver Surfer, Strife, Sentinel, Doctor Doom, Angel, Archangel because I have the uniform, Odin. The second row are 2 debuff leads that are remove all debuffs by 20 seconds, or the 20-second instead of the 12-second, and that's Supergiant and Malekith. So that is your full list of debuff leaders. Now, when we're talking again about a team of characters, the person that is chosen first in the squad, that is your leader. If they are not in that position, they do not debuff. So if you take into Timeline a Jean Grey and you do not have her in the leadership position or one of these other characters, your team does not have debuff, which means they could potentially be locked down. Now, some teams this might not matter for, other teams it would. It depends on who you're facing in Timeline. Just keep that in mind. So most folks you'll see have one of these folks here as the leader. Same thing if you're going into Alliance Conquest. If you're facing teams that you know have lockdown, make sure you're using a debuff lead. Vice versa, if you're attacking a phase and you realize they don't have a debuff lead, take advantage of that. Use your Spider-Man, use your Doctor Strange, use your characters like Scarlet Witch that are going to lock down their characters and take out the enemies rather quickly. So yeah, there's that. Now there are 2 special exceptions, so I'll show them now. You'll see here Wasp does have a debuff, but her debuff can special. It's actually a passive. She's the only character in the game that I know of that can do debuff just by being on the team as a support character. So you can have any leader you want, but if she's on the team with you, she's going to apply that debuff to all the allies. The other special exception is Blue Dragon. Now, Blue Dragon, she's a little different here. She only applies her debuff to Warriors of the Sky. So if she is a leader, she has a 5-second debuff to all Warriors of the Sky characters. Pretty strong. And I think a lot of people were actually not aware of that. So you could use her in certain circumstances as well. She's not one of the meta characters at the moment, so you don't see her used a lot, but she is an option if you build her right, that she has that debuff leadership as well as really very powerful leadership there that applies to Warriors of the Sky as well for the all attack. So that's my little explanation as far as debuff goes, why you want it, how you use it by using one of these characters, and hopefully this answers some questions for you and maybe makes you play the game a little differently and a little bit better. So yeah, remember to thumb up, like, and subscribe, and I'll have more videos coming your way. Thanks for watching.